Gertie, I knew that this was going to happen. There we go. You're going to get some pets right now. Mm-hmm. All right, Gertie, I'm going to start the show now.
If you don't mind.
Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals, some Royal Pains in Utah edition. I'm your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2020.
Happy
Welcome
New
to
Year.
2025. This is our first main feed episode of the new year. Eric and I sort of backed into, by accident, a very good week to take off last week because we are both in Los Angeles, both safe, both have not been under any serious evacuation danger from the Eaton fire, but it has been a pretty stressful week, and we have people in our lives or know people who have been directly affected by both the Palisades and the Eaton and the Hearst fires. And it's been pretty darn scary and strange and surreal to wake up on first thing on Wednesday morning and to see the entire sky covered in smoke. Was the final thing to check off my living in Los Angeles bingo card.
I just turned the corner from my house and I could watch the Eaton fire happening on the horizon on Tuesday night, and went to a friend's for dinner on Saturday and could watch the Palisades fire from their place.
Yeah.
It is surreal. It has been a scary time, I think, for lots of people who live here.
Yeah.
And honestly, doing this show is such a blessing because it gives some time to prep and take our minds off what's just around.
Yeah.
So I couldn't be more grateful to have this show to do. And today we have actually a fair amount of news to talk about.
2 weeks of stuff to catch up on. Yeah. There's and it spreads far and wide in a lot of different areas of our work. So where should we start? Do you want to chat about the U.S. rosters? Should we chat about some signings, some themes of the signing period over the last couple of weeks? How do you want to get into this?
I think we should probably start with the U.S. roster just because it's not that surprising. I feel like when you have a good manager, the surprises are mostly pleasant. And when you have a bad manager, the surprises are ones you aren't surprised by and are deeply disappointed by.
And for people wanting to hear what we have to say about Futures Camp, we're going to do a really deep dive on the Futures Camp roster for Patreon on Thursday. Yeah. We might mention a couple of interesting highlights today, but we'll mostly focus just on some swings that Emma Hayes is making with the senior team. 7 players getting their first ever call-ups, which is fantastic. There are 4 players on top of that who have been capped under Hayes, but they have not been to a World Cup or an Olympics yet, which is great to continue young senior development. And there are 3 players who have been at previous tournaments, but who have not yet been called up under Hayes, and I think it's great that they're back in the mix. So it's a very interesting collection of players. You say not super surprising, but there are a couple of names that caught my eye.
Yeah, I guess I mean surprising in the pleasant way when you have a good manager that you're like, oh, I'm glad we're on the same page about this player.
Yeah.
As opposed to when you have somebody dragging in a player who's long past their prime just to bring back. I know that there were definitely like Ellis roster drops where I was like, are you kidding?
Yeah, sure. Well, and even some Andonovsky roster drops like that too. Yeah. I mean, we've said it on the show a lot that we live in a very different era with the U.S. women's national team. Hayes is the first head coach who is coaching the team without any period where the centralized contracts of U.S. athletes are with the federation rather than with the clubs. Andonovsky bridged that period, 2021 into 2022. And this whole camp, we've known the purpose of this camp from the get-go. It's to prepare a new generation of players to get ready for Brazil 27. And also, as Hayes made clear last week, it's also to put some new development processes in place to allow for more players to get more playing time and to find a pathway to playing time with the senior team than has maybe been available before.
Let's go through the roster quickly for the players that have been called up and have major tournament experience under Hayes, and just sort of do a temperature check on them. So Casey Murphy, not surprised she was there. I kind of feel like the season she put up with North Carolina last year warrants her selection here, or at least like isn't a bad look.
Well, she's also the most experienced goalkeeper that the U.S. has now, which is a good thing. And I think it's, somebody made a point to me recently that not only is it a good thing that the U.S. is bringing in some younger keepers to take a look at, but it's a really great thing that Emma Hayes probably doesn't know who her number one is for the next couple of years. And I think it's very rare that position has a lot of competition. Again, I don't remember if I said this on our show, but there's really only been 3 U.S. keepers for the last 30 years, which is insane to think about. So to make that position a really competitive crucible I think is going to be really beneficial for everyone. I think you and I are both in the Mandy McGlynn, which seems like
now McGlynn. Yeah.
Mandy is no longer married if we're reading the tea leaves. So I think you and I are both in the Mandy McGlynn camp at the moment, but we'll see what happens. Very interested to see what Claudia Dickey can do.
I feel like the U.S. goalkeeper position is kind of like the papacy. Like there's either someone there for a long time or they last 2 weeks, and there needs to be a whole new conclave.
Yeah.
And I feel like Casey Murphy might have the misfortune with where she is in the age curve of not really having a particularly long reign as number one.
Yeah. Let's think about the 4 goalkeepers that we've just listed here. They all skew young, besides Murphy. There's no Jane Campbell here. There's no, pity call up for Katie Lund here. It's Hayes quite clearly signaling that she's looking for the next generation. And so Murphy feels like she's falling into the Ashlyn Harris track.
Yeah.
Maybe spending a year grabbing some starting caps, but might just be on the wrong side of the age curve in the wrong moment of the cycle to solidify at number one for 2027.
Yeah, this definitely feels like Mandy McGlynn
she's the front runner,
well positioned to hold that for a long time. Whether it's a good thing or not to have the same national team goalkeeper for many cycles, I think we can debate differently.
But also, I think it's very legitimate that Mandy McGlynn does not have a hold on this job and probably won't for a while. And I think that's really to the benefit of the program that you get a lot of seasoning for several different goalkeepers over the next couple of years.
That's right. The Angelina Anderson selection, we can just go position by position. Sure. The Angelina Anderson selection is the only head scratcher just because we saw a lot of her at Angel City. And by that, I mean, we actually didn't see that much of her.
She was being positioned at the beginning of the season to take the number one job from Didi Haracic. And she did start the first, I think, third of the year. And then she did not keep that job.
Yeah,
and Haracic came back. The points in Anderson's corner is that she turns 24 in March. She's young. She's got U20 experience, but I'm just pulling up her shot stopping numbers from 2024. So in 317 minutes in 2024, very, very small sample, only faced 23 shots on target, was significantly worse than expected in terms of saving the quality of the shots that she faced. So it's an extremely small sample. It might not mean much. And it seems like her turning 24 in March is a significant driver of why she's getting looked at. And she also has a reputation of being a pretty good distributor from the back. That hasn't always borne itself out in the data, but again, she hasn't gotten a lot of playing time, so who knows what that can really mean. So it's Hayes casting a pretty wide net by having her there. Doesn't mean that she's going to be there forever. Doesn't mean she's going to take a job that she might not deserve. It's just, that's why I don't really have my backup about any of these picks, even if they're from players who I don't think are like super amazing necessarily, because we just got to test things out and see what works. So why not?
She is if you were only calling in 3 goalkeepers, she would have been the one without a musical chair.
Yeah.
But it's a big we'll see.
Yeah. Meanwhile, with center backs, it's steady as she goes. Germa, Davidson, Sam, Sonnet, and then Tara McKeown is absolutely deserving of a call-up based on the season she had with Washington. So there's nothing really to fluff our hair about that.
Tara McKeown, as we've said on the pod, basically did a solid Sam Staub impression while maybe being an even better defender in Washington. This is just a remarkable season she put together. I think she can, maybe not immediately, but long-term challenge for a starting spot on this team as a defender. I thought she's been, for multiple seasons now, bordering on at least one of our best 11s when we do end of season NWSL best 11s. So well done, Tara McKeown.
Yeah.
No notes.
Her defensive G+ data is a little shaky, but that I think comes from the on-ball defense. She's just not having a lot of opportunities to put in a tackle.
Yep.
Because Boutel was sort of doing that job. And then her positional off-ball defensive work was quite superlative. So yeah.
We go next to fullback, where I think we probably do have more room for conversation.
It's a thin pool at the moment. We know that Casey Kruger, Sofia Huerta, Crystal Dunn, these are not players who are going to be in Brazil in 2.5 years' time. So there's a lot of runway to bring in new blood. Also, Jenna Neiswanger's had some wobbles in a U.S. shirt over the last 8 months to a year. But Dunn is here. Neiswanger's here. Alyssa Melanson getting another call-up, which I think is great. We thought she deserved it last fall, so that's to be expected. But I am a little and Ryan Williams, let's see what Ryan Williams can do.
Was great last year for North Carolina. At least I believe his defensive G+ went.
Yes, she was superlative. So yeah, I mean, she's on the older side. She's going to be 29 next year. So does that mean she's gonna be at the top of the depth chart in June of 27? Who knows? But let's take a look, see what you got. But no Maddie Curry, really? That's the surprise for me.
Izzy Rodriguez did not put up enough minutes. There's another one that I'm a little surprised isn't there. And the Futures camp lacks some of that fullback intrigue I might have had as well.
Yeah, and it's clear that the Futures camp is very specifically a reimagining of the U23 program, because Hayes is very interested as part of these structural processes she wants to overhaul. She really wants to make the U23 team a legitimate youth national developmental team, specifically as that pipeline once you age out of U20 to get you to the senior team. So regular camps, regular friendlies, making it an established part of the U.S. setup. So unfortunately, Izzy Rodriguez is too old for that. But you only brought 4 fullbacks to the senior team, and you're giving first call-ups to a lot of players. Izzy Rodriguez could have been one of those players.
Ryan Williams is the name I'm pleased to see here, just because I think the club performances justify their presence. Alyssa Melanson similarly. But I feel like Crystal Dunn, who is a staple and who has a long relationship with Emma Hayes, didn't warrant this selection. And
puzzling too, because of just how little playing time she got in Gotham too.
That's what I'm getting at. In a healthier setup, your club form will actually matter when it comes to your national team selection. And I think you can take a look at this January camp across the board and say, hey, the club form was really good for a lot of these players.
Most of them.
For almost everyone. And
Dunn and Neiswanger kind of stick out, yeah.
And Neiswanger's is better.
Yeah.
And she's in the right place in the age curve and got a lot of minutes.
Right.
Dunn's is more concerning to me. And so you sort of wonder, there's some senior leadership maybe being put in here.
Could be a senior leadership question. I mean, you can't call in Lindsay Horan because she's in season. Like, none of the players who are playing in Europe could be called in for this, since it's not an official FIFA window. So she is the only player besides Emily Sonnet who is both over 30 and has a lot of major tournament experience. So maybe it's just that, especially with Lynn Williams dropping out. So, maybe it's just that. Hard to say.
Yeah.
And we won't have friendlies to judge either. So who knows? Who knows where Crystal Dunn falls in Emma Hayes' plans over the next couple of years?
My feeling is that if you are selected for a January camp like this, you might be in play for 2027. And so I agree that it is not surprising to not see Casey Kruger here. But it is surprising to see Crystal Dunn here.
Yeah, fair.
And if you were going to ask me which one of those two I think warranted a spot in a January camp based on last season's performance, I think we would both agree that potentially Defender of the Year, Casey Kruger, would be the better selection.
Yeah, sure.
Let's move on and talk center mid. Any surprises here for you? Yes, I know the answer is yes. Sam Coffey, Hal Hirschfeld, great. Both warrant this selection. Neely Martin, tell me about what you're feeling, Neely Martin.
I mean, I guess let's see what you got, Neely. I've always tended to be the low person on her performances at Gotham, but it's also important to remember that Emma Hayes has access to a lot more granular information about her players' performances than we do in the public space. So she might be seeing something that she feels is a bit stickier and a bit more contributive to Gotham's midfield success from Martin than what we see. And I'm perfectly fine having her called in. She is one of those players where like, okay, I'm keeping my eye. I am watching with interest to see how this develops.
I suspect that Emma Hayes watches a lot of Gotham because she has so many Gotham players on this roster, and a contributing factor, and one that has worked for other national teams, like with Barcelona. If you have a lot of players who already play together, putting them on the national team with a level of familiarity doesn't actually knock you here. So I wonder if Neely Martin isn't benefiting a little bit from the Gotham effect.
Very possible.
In her selection here. Because I would have probably had Taylor Flint as my, if you're going to bring somebody in, selection here.
I agree. Especially since you're calling in old heads. Like,
or Kiara Pickett. Like, I think what those players did on the field in 2024 for their clubs fully justify their selection here.
And what makes me worry about Hayes maybe correcting for that and calling some of these players we're citing in is she said last week, like, she is more or less, after this camp, she said she will have more or less seen everybody that she wants to see for the cycle.
Yeah.
Which that'll change. Obviously, that's going to change. But, there are players who maybe you should want to see that you're not calling in.
Exactly. And, like, fine, Claire Hutton goes to the Futures camp. But, like, every central midfielder we just listed, I would have taken over Neely Martin. But, hey, you get a fifth goalkeeper as well.
That's right.
So there's that. And I have nothing on Hannah Bieber or Bibar or Babar. I don't know how we.
She's.
You thought Belgian elephant. I thought Canadian pop sensation.
There you go.
But yeah, tell me what your thoughts are on Hannah.
Not too many. Again, was it Duke for her final year college? Can play the 6, can play the 8, can be more of a progressive central mid, can be a more defensive central mid, depending on what you're asking of her. Yeah, has experience at the U20 and U23 levels. Yeah, I'm very curious about why Hayes decided to replace Lynn Williams with her in the senior camp rather than maybe having Babar go to the futures camp and bring in, say, Taylor Flint, for example, to replace Lynn Williams. If you were hoping to look at another midfielder.
My bigger questions are only 3 caps with the U20s and none with the U23s.
Well, the U23s, it's very hard to get caps.
Sure, but 3 caps, 15 caps with the U17, but it sort of feels like...
Yeah, they'll start to count less, obviously, given her age.
Yeah, she put in college time at Harvard and then at Duke. Mm-hmm. It's a big shrug. She's not caught on with an NWSL team. That's someone like I'd want to interrogate Chris Henderson about for a minute. Mm-hmm. Let's continue on to sort of attacking midfield. We've broken up midfield into sort of 2 phases, kind of as Emma Hayes has broken up midfield into 2 phases of player.
3 players who can play the 10, Jaedyn Shaw, Ashley Sanchez, Savannah DeMello. These are 3 of the players who are in the mix for that position three players who are perennially in the mix for that position. Rose Lavelle's not here because of an injury. Kat Macario not here because she's in England with Chelsea. So these are the next three up.
I feel perfectly fine about all three of these as selections. DeMello's the only one who didn't put together a great season last year.
She's been to a World Cup, and I think Hayes wants to see how she can handle herself after facing some adversity that she maybe had not previously faced.
Let's move on to the forward line unless there's something else. I don't think there's any big question marks there. This is where things get interesting. Morgan Weaver. It's so nice for this podcast.
I cannot really complain about anything with regard to this lineup because Morgan Weaver's here, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
that's how I feel too.
Yeah.
Morgan Weaver is, I think at one point you described her as the best club player in the world not to have appeared in a major tournament.
Yeah. And I think I might still stand by that.
I think that that's likely right. Morgan Weaver is, and has been for years, kind of playing number two, like the Scottie Pippen to Sophia Smith's Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a perfect way of saying it. Yeah.
And has been every bit as good as that comparison draws. Like, Morgan Weaver is a very complete two-way attacking wide player.
Maybe what we say to describe Morgan Weaver is she's the best club player in the world with fewer than 5 senior international caps.
Sure. That's fair.
Yeah.
And her presence here feels really long overdue. And I think you and I were both concerned that she might not ever get another look just because of her age.
She's 27. Yeah, exactly.
And for attackers, that's sort of like where you start saying you need to have converted on your promise. And the answer is she's converted on her promise for a long time.
Many times over, in fact.
Yeah, many, many times over. So this feels like a win for those of us who are analytics inclined, but I actually feel like you don't need to be analytics inclined to feel like this is a win. You just have to have watched Morgan Weaver play.
Yeah, by net G plus above positional average per 96 minutes in the NWSL regular season last year. Among the forwards who are in this camp, the only two who performed better than her were Lynn Williams and Ella Stevens. That's it.
Yeah.
You know? Like, she's a goddamn... Well, and Jaedyn Shaw. Okay, fine. But still, if you are in the top 4 among the forward line or among attacking players in production, it's a no-brainer that you should be here. And it's absolutely absurd that you hadn't been in over 3 years.
Yeah, that's right. She was one of the big omissions when we were talking about like unpleasant realities. She was one of those big Vlatko omissions that you just kind of kept looking at and you were like, really? Seriously?
And from everything that we understand from behind the scenes, she is an incredibly hard worker and she's like a legendary locker room presence. Like, yeah. And you can even see like she doesn't hide her personality on the field, you know?
No.
And it's like, there's absolutely no reason for her not to have been here already. And I can't imagine her ever doing anything beyond injury to not prove that she deserves to be there now.
Ashley Hatch is an interesting one. She gives the U.S. a really different look at forward than anyone else in the pool currently does.
And that's maybe something that Hayes feels is important, to have a bench target striker available because Alex Morgan retired. So there's nobody else who can do that. And that's fair. I mean, I as frustrating as I could sometimes find people's uncritical cheerleading of Ashley Hatch at times, she was a very legitimate bubble player for me for 2023 because of the different look that she could offer as someone who is there to pump in crosses, or to receive and then pump in crosses, or to run off the shoulder and just be a bully to center backs. She's going to be 30 next year. She'll be 32 or 31 going on 32 by the time the World Cup rolls around. What will she be like then? But I just like that Hayes wants to see where she's at in this present moment.
Yeah, I agree with you. Ashley Hatch down the stretch for Washington proved the sort of uniqueness of what she can do. And I think she was a substantial part of why Washington ended up in the final. So I'm okay with, I'd be Ashley Hatch curious too if I were Emma Hayes.
For sure.
Emma Sears, no surprise, has played her way onto this team.
Yeah. Ellie Sentner, Alyssa Thompson, not and really shocking there either. Especially says Alyssa Thompson really started to swing back into form after the Olympics. But Ella Stevens is getting her first call-up, and I don't know how much more we can really say about Ella Stevens on this show at this point, but 1,000% deserved.
Ella Stevens took the jump last year from like squad depth level NWSL pro to like full-on threatening attacker in that league. And this call-up feels like the just rewards for what she put together as a season last year.
And again, she just turned 27, so does she have a long-term future in the program? Don't know yet, but you gotta see how she handles herself in the international environment. So I think across the board there is a solid core here of veterans of both the Olympics and recent tournaments. There's a very intriguing mix of first-timers, a very intriguing mix of returning players, and some absences that I think we both wish were not absent, but it's a very, very solid foundation to discover what the 2027 World Cup team might look like.
I agree. All right, let's move on and talk NWSL action, and really the three teams that have been big-time movers and shakers as far as acquisitions are concerned. And they probably aren't the three teams you or I would have considered.
Well, and yes, and also they're not even necessarily the three teams who have made the highest volume of transactions, but I think these are the three teams that over the last 2 weeks have made the most consequential transactions for their futures.
That's a better way of putting it.
Yeah,
let's talk about the consequential actions that we have seen in the NWSL.
Do we start with the biggest one of all, or do we start with the team that's probably made the most of these consequential actions?
I want to talk about what's going on in Utah, so I think that's probably the one that we start with, even though that might have not been either of the two that you were just talking about.
I actually think this is a good place to start because a lot has happened both on and off the field with Utah.
Yeah,
I think they are doing some pretty good business, and they are also in the spotlight for some pretty shitty things some people in that organization are alleged to have done in the first half of 2024. So where to start?
Let's start with the good before we get to the bad, or the interesting before we get to the bad. I think tying up Mandy McGlynn for 5 years is just a great piece of work.
What a coup.
Yeah, the single best player got in expansion, I think, at this point, and now tied down for essentially peak seasons and made a cornerstone of your franchise.
She is the only player in the entire league who is guaranteed and under contract in 2029.
Yep.
It's kind of wild.
For me, I think maybe the next most fascinating signing is Aisha Solorzano.
Hell yeah.
Who like we had talked about when we were talking to Amy Lopez.
We were basically like, this kind of feels like someone who's going to make a big jump, because she was at Tijuana last year, but put up like, at least according to Y-Scouts numbers, she put up like 0.6 non-penalty XG plus XA per 96, which was excellent. And one of the few players who was not like, a really high profile. She's one of the few players not on one of the big five teams at the top of that leaderboard. She's Guatemalan, so she's not on a high profile international program. She played for Tijuana, who had a very nice season for Tijuana in the Clausura or in the Apertura in the fall. But yeah, I mean, someone who could have easily missed, even if you were watching a lot of Liga MX Femenil. But she signed a 3-year deal, is turning 27 next year. And if I were to put money on it, feels like she is going to be the starting number 9 for Utah. And what a pickup.
How many goals did she score for Tijuana last year?
Question.
Yeah, she had 16 and 16.
Yeah, that's great.
And that is just very impressive. And to do that without much in the way of teammate support.
Yeah, for the Apertura, she was second in the Golden Boot race. 2 goals behind Jaedyn Shaw. Like, incredible stuff.
This is also likely for an international transfer, not super expensive. And it's a great move all around. It's a great move for Solorzano. It's a great move for Utah. This is a player that when we had Amy Lopez on, I think I had thought would be a good fit for Bay as backup to Asisata Schwala before Hawking had made her move over. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is an exciting signing. How are you feeling about Ana Maria Guzman and Mia Justice?
They needed to stock up on a backup goalkeeper because Carly Nelson left in free agency. Mm-hmm. So I think Justice certainly with Tegan Y has a reputation of being the best college goalkeeper available. So if you are planning on, and she's at the Futures Camp, so if this is your plan to have her as the third string keeper, maybe compete for full on backup spot, I think it's a nice little piece. Ana Maria Guzman, very, very young player. She's only going to be 19 and needed minutes. She's signed with Bayern Munich and got loaned out to try and gain some senior level experience. Has sort of like been sniffing around the edges of the Colombia national team, but is just pretty unseasoned. So I don't really know what to expect from Guzman. Or she's going to be 20 next year, rather. So this feels like attacking depth. You know, it's hard for me to see her unseating Ali Sintner, Chloe Lacasse, Mina Tanaka, Aisha Solorzano, Paige Monahan. Like, that feels like the depth chart in terms of their attack at the moment. But
don't you feel like she's probably going to end up playing fullback for them?
Very possibly. Very possibly. Yeah.
Like, that's sort of where I see her naturally sliding in. But I like it as a piece. Go get interesting 19 and 20-year-olds.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't re-sign Zoe Burns, your depth at fullback becomes Olivia Smith-Griffiths, who had a acceptable, I think, rookie year, if not a great one, and Madison Pogarsh, who was terrible. So if Ana Maria Guzman can demonstrate that she has both defensive acumen and is comfortable playing wide, then transitioning her into a fullback is not the worst idea in the world. We'll just see if that is what Jimmy Kunratz wants to do. So, yeah, no, but Solorzano is the highlight. And again, just looking at locking up McGlynn for 5 years, trading for Alex Loera, getting Solorzano. You still you potentially can still get a tune out of Lacasse and Tanaka. You have Claudia Zornosa. Like, this is just, and you re-signed Paige Monahan. You extended Paige Monahan for 3 years. Like, this is just a really interesting team right now. And we've said that before, and it's not like they're getting less interesting or they're holding serve. They continue to get more interesting. That's
right. They currently have 24 players under contract for next year. So there is still some room. Mm-hmm. Like, they might have 1 or 2 more things up their sleeve. Mm-hmm. You look at this roster top to bottom, and you have to think they have some money there.
Oh, they got money. They absolutely have money.
Exactly. So they
shouldn't be done. That's sort of what we're getting at. Kelly Cousins should be out making moves still.
They have some pretty great pieces, and they shouldn't be done.
Yeah, they've got the money, they got the roster space. They should be going out and signing some more folks. But we now have to turn to the bad.
Yeah.
Carly Nelson, backup goalkeeper for Utah last year, I believe a Utah native as well, posted to Instagram allegations of harassment and emotional abuse suffered at the hands of members of the Utah Royals coaching staff, and implied that there were people or a person in the front office that protected the abusers, that is, and that mid-season some of these people were no longer with the club. But in Nelson's words, the damage had been done, and that is why she ended up taking an extended excused absence, which is how it was filed with the availability reports, but now we know was an extended mental health leave from the league. She's a free agent now. She almost certainly will not be coming back to Utah. But I think if we can read between the lines and basing hirings and firings and the timelines of all of that, it feels as if the people she is talking about are Amy Rodriguez, goalkeeper coach Maryse Barb-Martel, and Royals president Michelle Heinchik, who, by the way, was a high school soccer teammate of A-Rod's and was the primary driver of getting A-Rod hired. Those three people are no longer with the club. Heinchik was not fired, but rather reassigned within the broader David Blitzer organization, a transition that was announced in June when A-Rod and Barb-Martel got fired, but it didn't actually become official, I've come to discover, until last month in December. So she is still working for David Blitzer, even if she's not working for the Utah Royals directly.
Kudos to Carly Nelson for coming out and saying something that is really, really challenging to say in a professional environment and yet needs saying.
And in the context of what's going on with the San Diego Wave lawsuit, it is important to not allow for the bad actors in these situations to argue that it was just one bad apple or a few bad apples or what have you. We need to get people on the record about their behavior and understand that there's still a lot of work to do in how we address the workplace environments of NWSL teams and women's soccer and women's sports more generally. So it's really important. I mean, I feel awful that Carly Nelson had to go through this and that she's still clearly struggling with it.
We don't talk enough about the mental part of the game and the bad actors that can really change the fortunes of your career.
Mm-hmm.
And so anytime a player sheds light on something like this, you have to take it extraordinarily seriously. Yeah. Let's move on to fucked club number 2, San Diego.
In so many ways, there is a 6th person added to the lawsuit against the club alleging workplace harassment and emotional abuse. So on top of that, they officially announced Jonas Jaedyn as their head coach, which we knew was coming based on the news being broken before the holidays. But right now, in this moment, as of Monday, January 13th at 12:15 p.m. Pacific time, they only have 17 players on their roster. It's insane. And it's not like they are not making a lot of additions. It's just they're making a lot of subtractions. Players are going out the door at the moment.
There was room for some serious roster turnover here. And this will help us transition to the next team that we're talking about. I think subtraction by subtraction is mostly what we are dealing with here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how San Diego fields a good team next year. Now, granted, they have made some college signings that are very good.
Yeah, arguably would have been top 5 overall draft picks if we'd had a draft this year. But they're the only signings. They're the only players that they've brought in. Now, we'll bust their chops about only having 17 on their roster at the moment. They do have 2 months to get at least 9 more players on their roster, in fairness to them. But the wind is not blowing in a good direction. Like the rumors of Naomi Gurva leaving for Europe have not abated.
Those will likely continue and persist until she either literally leaves for Europe or she signs a very long extension for a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Trinity Byers may end up being a solid enough replacement for Jaedyn Shaw that this isn't noticed, but you're taking one of the best, if not the best, young player in the NWSL and shipping her out, and for some cash that you have yet to show the intention of spending well.
And Trinity Byers is injured, so she's not even going to be able to start the season, most likely.
That's right. This is a team that feels like it's in full rebuild mode and maybe shouldn't be. You've got age 28 Delphine Cascarino, age 29 Maria Sanchez, age 31 Mackenzie Doniak, age 28 Savannah McCaskill. That's win now ages.
Yep. Especially for players of the caliber that Cascarino and to some extent Sanchez and McCaskill offer you. Like, this is your window to do something with that particular roster.
And right now it's just, you throw your hands up and you just sort of say, what is going on? Now, if the theory of of transferring Jaedyn Shaw is that she's not in the window to win now, and we need to free up money and bring in a bunch of players. The clock is ticking on that, and I'd love to see it start happening if I'm a San Diego Wave supporter.
Yeah.
But right now, there is just so much uncertainty, and GM Camille Ashton at this point left Kansas City in a dust cloud and seems to be doing similar stuff here. Speaking of addition by subtraction, it feels like teams get better with not Camille Ashton in charge. And Eideval and Ashton are not exactly carrying the reputations one might hope for a club going through what should be some soul searching.
Insofar in the ways that they handle roster management. Like Eideval, after the signing was announced, said his biggest regret and the reason he felt he had to move on from Arsenal was that he mishandled the Viv Miedema signing, in not re-signing her and also the way in which that process sort of unfolded. That was the moment where he lost the trust of Arsenal supporters. So that's also an issue that Camille Ashton is reputed to have, that she does not communicate well with players that she ships at the drop of a dime. So they're great bedfellows in that regard.
And like, what if you had, say, a really dynamic attacker upon whom your entire team's future was riding, and you had that player, and your personalities were enough to suggest to that player it was time to get the hell out of Dodge? Oh wait, it just absolutely happened. Jaedyn Shaw
has been transferred to the North Carolina Courage.
How are you feeling about this transfer for North Carolina?
Let's talk through some of the details about that to connect San Diego to North Carolina. Like, Shaw, if folks remember, did not want to play in San Diego when she was 17 and was about to enter the league. But Jill Ellis, as club president, snatched up her discovery rights under the cover of night. And then Shaw had no choice. She was like, well, if you want to play in the NWSL, you're going to have to play for me. So I don't think that endeared Shaw to the organization. Now, new ownership, Ellis is gone, new GM, et cetera, and so forth. But it seems as though Shaw had been agitating for a transfer for quite a while. And this is how we get it done. It's not been officially announced by either the Courage or the Wave yet, but the reporters who have broken this story, namely Jeff Kassouf over at Equalizer, he does not break news unless he knows he's got a story buttoned up. So this has happened, and we don't know the amount of money. It is going to be an all cash, essentially an intra-league transfer. We don't know for how much, but it is implied that it could be the largest intra-league transfer in league history.
I'll go out and say it should be.
Yeah.
If it turns out not to be, San Diego didn't get their money's worth.
No.
And Shaw ends up in a North Carolina team where I have questions about fit, but it's a good player to add to your squad no matter what. And if you have the opportunity to go and grab a Jaedyn Shaw and you have the room to do so financially, you absolutely should. And then figure out the fit later.
I think that Sean Nahas, for whatever you want to say about him, is implying that he's ready to reimagine North Carolina's attack. Because the reason that we're citing North Carolina here is not just because of Shaw, but also because they signed Hannah Betfort, who was on the free agent market after a year at Utah. They extended Monica Matsukubo, and we still don't have word about Caroline. That is telling me that maybe they think Caroline's not coming back, and so they need to add a great deal of attacking dynamism in the form of a superstar. And North Carolina last year, they were in 10th place on XG produced in the entire league for a team that has such a highly defined tactical identity and doesn't waver from it, for a team that has managed to make the playoffs in 2 out of the 3 years that Nahas has coached them. They are pretty toothless in front of goal because they're 10th on XG, but they were also, 6th, but a soft 6th in terms of the non-penalty goals they actually scored. So this is a group that needed to reinvent itself attacking wise. And if you can figure out a way to not shackle Shaw to a way too structured possession system and actually decide to reimagine your tactics with her as the axis around which everything else spins. Well, goddamn, man, because, Monica still could end up becoming a pretty decent player. You have Ashley Sanchez there. Tyler Lucy and Haley Hopkins are decent pieces, even though they're not central to, or they shouldn't be central to your attack. Betfort is a very nice number 9. Like, there's stuff to work with here. And Jaedyn Shaw is one of those players that doesn't matter where she plays, doesn't matter what system she's in, she's going to make you better. Full stop. And given her age, if you play your cards right, if you hire a good GM to replace Kurt Johnson, and that is a massive if you can figure out some other elements of off-field structure and infrastructure around North Carolina, in other words, if you commit to Shaw to making the team, to investing in the team and making the team better off the field as well as on it, you potentially have a generational talisman in your lap right now.
My hesitations here are because I think you could be right, but Sean Nahas has been probably the most rigid.
I don't think it's probably. I think it's
system manager in the league. He has been. Yeah. He has been. He has been the least flexible mind tactically in the league for some time. For as good as Jaedyn Shaw is, she is not Caroline yet. And it seems increasingly clear to me, especially with the outlay of cash that it took to get Jaedyn Shaw, that Caroline is not coming back.
I think you're right.
Caroline is not coming back to a team that was pretty anemic without her. And Jaedyn Shaw gets you like 80% of the way there, but fits a lot less well with Ashley Sanchez.
This is actually the point, because Jaedyn Shaw and Caroline don't play the same position. So even if Jaedyn Shaw is 100% on just raw talent, she's still not going to slot in at right wing, because we saw when both Emma Hayes / Twyla Kilgore and whoever was coaching San Diego at any given moment, whenever they tried to shunt Shaw out wide, it didn't quite click in the same way when she was playing underneath as a false 9 or as a number 10.
Just a little insight into the way in which Evan and I talk about this. We were immediately texting about this Shaw transfer, and my concerns were, we sort of talked about the ways in which we imagine Nahas deploying her. And she's obviously a great signing for any team, but the idea that she'll be shunted to the wing, bad outcome for both player and frankly for team. That Nahas builds a double 10, which, given the players on your roster, is probably the sensible thing to do, to completely reimagine your system, which is door number 2, as you've explained. Or he'll make her a false 9, which is such a completely different role and demanding role to ask of a Jaedyn Shaw. And while I think it could work, Jaedyn Shaw has proved to be one of the best face-up attacking the goal with the ball at her feet players in the young players in the world. With her back to goal, we have just not seen that player yet. It's a completely new role.
So that's the issue with false 9. When you're talking about a double 10, you are going to have a ton of passing movement high up the pitch in the attacking third and moving into the box, and that's great. But all of a sudden, you only have a single pivot in midfield, and Denise O'Sullivan cannot do that anymore. Nairumi Mira is with the Washington Spirit now. Riley Jackson, is she a defensively minded midfielder? Is she ready to step up into a starting role, given her age and how little experience she got last year? Open questions. Do you have the money to go get a 6 to help O'Sullivan out in a structure like that? It just completely unbalances your midfield, as good as that setup would be, with 5 primary attackers filling all 5 attacking channels at once. There's just not a lot of defensive cover or progression from deeper areas. And then with the wing, she just doesn't have that vision for wide play sort of built into her. Now, she's young enough that she could potentially learn how to be a pretty solid wide attacking force. And it's maybe worth considering. I know that's why Kilgore and Hayes considered it, because there are just so many players in the U.S. pool whose best position is number 10 that you can't have them all playing there at the same time. And you've got Rose Lavelle and Lindsay Horan sort of gumming up the works there too. So you can't not have Shaw on the field. So where do you put her? At the age that she is, she could develop those wide attacking skills. Is this the moment where that could occur? We just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, my feeling is Jaedyn Shaw has been very good on a team that missed the playoffs, and that might be the case again next season.
Maybe.
Like, I think that North Carolina is so thin in so many different ways, and if you're going to play a double 10, you need to be on some level, unless you are literally Barcelona, comfortable with the idea of losing possession.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely nothing in Sean Nahas's DNA that says he is comfortable with the idea of losing possession. Teams that run 210s out also tend to have better attacking pieces around these 210s than just the 210s themselves. Like, they need to have finishing product. Again, Matsukubo could become that player. But I look at this roster and it's like Pinto, Betfort, who was okay. She was good in small bursts in Portland. She was okay in Utah on a bad team. It's kind of hard to assess how she'll fit here. I think she's probably the day one starter, but like, she is not yet a goal machine. And she is entering a period of her career where we're kind of like closer to certain about what kind of player she is. And so many things need to line up, and there needs to be a tolerance for a certain amount of discomfort. There needs to be like a Seb Hines, Haley Carter level of comfort with like this shit not working for many months on end.
Yeah.
To get it right eventually. Like, if North Carolina is like 2025 is we figure out what we have with Jaedyn Shaw and Ashley Sanchez, and we just work that system. And we are comfortable missing the playoffs. We just want to make sure that this nucleus that we believe can win championships has the reps in. I don't think Sean Nahas has the rope to not make the playoffs as a manager.
I mean, maybe, but we also don't really know what's going on with the org at the moment, with Kurt Johnson leaving after more than 7 years as the GM of that organization, and they still haven't hired a new GM yet. Seems like Steve Malick is involving himself in decision-making, maybe more than he used to, or is just being more blatant about it. So it could just be that Nahas, because he's been there for almost a decade, if you count his assistant years, like, is just entrenched and won't leave no matter what happens. Who knows?
Totally, but it requires a roadmap I have yet to see North Carolina demonstrate having.
Yeah, and also Nahas holds himself in very high regard.
Yeah.
So he is not going to just say, after he's been spending more than 2 years being like, we know how we want to play, we think it's the right way to play, and we're not going to waver from that. I don't see him all of a sudden shuffling the tactical deck just because Jaedyn Shaw's here now.
That's exactly it.
So that then speaks exactly to your concerns, which I frankly my concerns as well. Like, it doesn't feel like it feels like she's a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, and she might be the better square peg than Ashley Sanchez for this team, but the one role you didn't need to replace last year was what Ashley Sanchez gave you in North Carolina. So I worry about this for Shaw's development, particularly if she is being put in suboptimal positions for her development.
If they don't think that it works this year, if it ends up not working this year and they don't feel like they can ever get it to work and get the right team around Shaw or get the right system around Shaw, well, she's only got a year plus a club option. You just decline the club option and let her move on. Yeah,
which strikes me as particularly bad business if you've already spent a lot of money to bring her in, to letting her go for free.
Of course. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. And that's, if I'm trying to imagine how you make this North Carolina team work, and like, I don't know how aware they are of Denise O'Sullivan's decline. Like, I don't know how much that's registering for them, but I have to imagine it's registering somewhat, or at least a little. I think going to like yeah, something that's closer to a 4-2-2-2 is like your play. And that's...
Yeah. But that's going to require Riley Jackson to level up this year, or for you to somehow scrounge up the cash to go get somebody else to park themselves next to O'Sullivan.
Yeah, and frankly, you just don't have the... You might have the fullbacks for that in Ryan Williams and Macy Bell. You might.
And Feli Rauk.
Yeah, but Feli Rauk was not great. Maybe Feli Rauk is where you convert to a second defensive midfielder. Like, Feli Rauk did not give you a lot. It's just, there are...
1,000%.
Yes, North Carolina jumped out at the right time to sign a good player. You should always give yourself these kinds of problems. If a Jaedyn Shaw becomes available, do what it takes to get a Jaedyn Shaw. That said, Jaedyn Shaw does not clear up any of the picture or answer any of the questions that were hanging over North Carolina this offseason. And
that's right.
If that means at the cost of not being able to re-sign Caroline, which frankly may have always been the case, but if that's like at the cost of like not being able to re-sign a player who gave you a much more distinct pathway forward toward the kind of play you wanted to execute, and basically was your offense when on the field, you haven't fixed that. And so for me right now, North Carolina is a worse team than they were last year already.
So on the Discord, like, I threw up a bunch of categories of like how teams off seasons are shaping up at the moment.
Oh, I love this.
So I created 4, 5, 6. I created 8 here.
All right, you want to read them off and we'll talk about them?
I do.
Yeah.
So my first category is teams that are being aggressive this offseason. And I slotted the Courage in Gotham here. Next is the teams who are trying, but will it work? ? That's Utah. The teams are trying, but haphazardly category. That's Portland and Seattle. Teams that are holding serve, but still intent to compete. That's Orlando, Washington, and Kansas City. Each have made some moves, but they're minor, and it seems like their starting 11s probably aren't going to be ruffled too.
Yeah, I might call that teams that didn't need to fix a lot.
Right, sure, yeah. The if it ain't broke category. Yeah. Teams that are holding serve because they actually have no money or permanent GM in place to be able to do that. That's Louisville. Teams that are holding serve because they actually don't have any money to spend because they're capped out. That's Bay FC. Teams who are absolutely not going for it, and credit listener Joel for the title of that one. San Diego, Angel City, and Chicago. And WTF is Houston. And in parentheses, I put, because they're spending money, but they're doing it by launching it through a t-shirt cannon.
Yeah, I might file that as a 4-year-old finger painting on your living room wall.
But it sort of looks like a Pollock, like a Jackson Pollock.
It might be beautiful, but it's also a 4-year-old finger painting on your living room wall.
Yeah.
You can admire it for whatever it is. All right, you want to start off?
Would you move North Carolina to teams trying but haphazardly?
Yeah, and
I don't have a problem with that.
Emphasis on trying. Like, they are trying. I suspect they also tried to re-sign Caroline. And look, if they re-sign Caroline, own goal on me. But right now, I don't know how they do that. And Jaedyn Shaw feels like a concession to that point. If they re-sign Caroline and they suddenly have Jaedyn Shaw, Ashley Sanchez, and Caroline, well, you got weapons. And Sean Nahas is probably better at figuring out that kind of problem than Rob Gale is. And you've got like Portland level weapons if you have those three.
Right. So which other teams would you maybe move into a different category?
I suppose being aggressive just doesn't like sit exactly right for me for what I feel like Gotham has done. Gotham has overhauled or like forced themselves to overhaul. But like, have they gotten better? It also feels a little haphazard.
Well, I guess what I meant with that was that aggressive wasn't meant to imply good or bad, like they're getting better or worse.
Okay, fair.
I also think it's not necessarily haphazard. There does seem to be a certain logic to the moves that they've made. And I think it is at least pointing them in the direction of staying as good as they were, or maybe trying to get better. So for me, it hasn't felt so haphazard the way that they've conducted their business. Bringing Gabby Portillo in, I think, is a great signing. Lily Reel, I think, is a very solid potential piece of defensive depth out of college. Like Shelby Hogan, great backup goalkeeper signing, especially given the fact that Abby Smith is injured and Cassie Miller is gone. Some of the other ones that they've done, like, Ryan Campbell fills out your goalkeeper core. Like Jalen Howell is a great way to replace Delaney Sheehan. Like, and then they've still, and also Maitane, and they've still got like most of their 11 in place. So for me, it felt like aggressive fit a team that has made a lot of moves in both directions, letting players leave and having players come in, but also seeming to address particular needs that could benefit them in the future. So it didn't quite feel haphazard to me.
I mean this in the nicest way possible, but I feel like they have a very large bucket that they are scooping water out of their leaky raft in. You know, like they have been leaking players. There have been huge departures, just a byproduct of like the sort of win now attitude that they had to take or that they chose to take.
Okay.
And they are doing an adequate job right now of, for all the water pouring in, being able to scoop it out. I'm just not sure they've gotten themselves better. I suppose that's aggressive, but it's almost aggressive because they have to be, as opposed to like the Courage who are like being aggressive haphazard. Like, I don't think that there's any team that like, I get what you're getting at, but yeah, they feel like they're very efficiently scooping the water as it leaks in out. And like, I like some of their solves, but none of them are like guaranteed banger hits, even though I suspect several of them will hit. Like, I suspect Gabby Portillo will be a hit, and I suspect Jalen Howell will be a hit, but they're not like, these are not the signings of Tierna Davidson, Rose Lavelle, Emily Sonnet.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. Any other teams you feel need to move?
Haphazardly, probably true for the Thorns, probably true for the Reign in really different ways. Like, I think why the Reign decided to cast off a 25-year-old midfielder, or a soon-to-be 25-year-old midfielder, in favor of an aging striker who's going to play on turf, I'll never know. Lynn Williams, great player. Team's trying, but will it work? That's sort of the same. The Thorns, you need another center back. You got Sam Hyatt, great work. Diane, they have a 1 clear starter, and 2, I don't know what you do with Obeys and Diane. I think you're bang on correct about the Pride, the Spirit, and Kansas City all holding to compete. These teams don't need to do a lot. And they haven't yet. But like, the Pride have, the Pride re-signed Marta, great. Grace Chanda's there. Like, the Pride could be like marginally better than they were last season, even.
Yeah, got some center back depth in signing Zara Chavoshi out of Wake Forest. Yeah, and then for Washington, Narumi Mira papers the crack that Andy Sullivan's ACL recovery created. Emma Gaines Ramos seems like it could be an interesting attacking piece. This game goes for Tamara Bolt and Deborah Abiodun at a Pitt. So yeah, nothing major, nothing sexy. The team is still the team.
Yeah.
So,
and Kansas City lacked some flexibility, but generally speaking, they are a year older, which is like of mild concern, but they were the best team in the regular season last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, no concerns there. Holding because they have no money, perma GM. Yeah, no, that's Louisville. Holding because they won't be a team in 2026 or 2027. Yeah, also possibly that as a title.
Yeah.
Holding because they have no cap space. Yeah, Bay. Moving Luera on, it seems like she was surplus to needs at that point, and they'd sort of solved the midfield problem. You know, we've said it a million times, the Dana Castellanos piece really does put them with one hand tied behind their back.
Yeah, and otherwise they signed 2 college players and re-signed a bunch of role players who didn't get many minutes last year. Like, this is still basically the same team, and none of those moves suggest that they have real money to go buy someone who will make an impact.
I almost think teams absolutely not going for it is like teams delusionally thinking they are going for it and absolutely not going for it. Because I don't think San Diego for a second thinks they're not going for it. They signed Jonas Eideval.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think Angel City has the self-awareness to not think that they are already with the talent required to win.
Julia Ehrman remains team president, and now she technically could work in could work with player transactions again since it's after January 1. It's all horrifying.
But I like Julie Dufour. They didn't need Julie Dufour, but I like Julie Dufour.
Team that still doesn't have a GM either.
If Vanessa Gilles comes back, I like their back line a lot more. Macy Hodge, interesting college signing. But yeah, and then Chicago, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they signed Maitane. It's a nice pickup. See what she's like now that she can be fully healthy. But otherwise, like, you're not going to have Sam Staub for the first half of the year. You're still relying on pieces that created the season that you had last year. And I just don't know how you improve on 2025. Unless Ludmila really can just become a wire-to-wire hit, pairing with Swanson, and Julia Grosso sorts herself out, and maybe, Maitane stays healthy enough to ensure that you don't have such major gaps defensively in the center of the park. And if all of that can happen, maybe you got a puncher's chance. But right now, it feels like you're standing pat. And, our good friends over at Gal Pal Sports, posted on social media. It's like, don't worry, signings are coming. But then one of the signings that they cited was for a player who I would not necessarily characterize as first off the bench in the 60th minute. There's still time. 2 months until the season starts.
The bigger thing is like so many of these teams deserve incompletes right now because they are incomplete as it currently stands.
Yeah.
This time last year, I was at the draft. And at that point, like, Bay didn't have Asisato Shwala or Rachel Kundananji.
Yeah.
There is still time for huge player transfers coming in and for teams to get a lot better. But so many teams outside of the Pride, the Spirit, and Kansas City, who I expect to still do little pieces of work here and there, everyone else gets some version of an incomplete.
But I think also, for the most part, I accept your critiques for where I slotted some of these teams. But I think in general, this does a fairly good job of describing the first 2 months of the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a favorite signing of this offseason so far?
I was just asked that on another podcast. I said at the time Maitane.
Yeah, I was going to give you a new one.
Which I think is a pretty good answer. But other than that, I don't know. I mean, I just think the Loera trade just really is kind of transformative for Utah. And it allows for them to carry an attacking piece like Aisha Solorzano. I've just been a really big fan of Utah's offseason.
Yeah, me too.
At least in terms of the on-field stuff.
Yeah, that's right. I think like low-key, I mean, she makes no sense to name players that you haven't already named and that we haven't talked. The Julie Dufour signing is just like, oh, you're just like a really good. What are you doing? What are you doing, Angel City? You're just like a good player.
Also a team that whose current roster is a little light.
Yeah.
I think they're at like 20 or 21 players at the moment.
Obviously, like what Trinity Byers was supposed to be the number 1 overall pick. I think that's a great piece of work. The number 1 overall pick is rarely a bust, which...
Let's talk about college signings for just a quick second. 20 players have signed out of college at this point in time, as of Monday, January 13th at about 1 p.m. Pacific. If you want to argue that these would have been the first 20 players off the draft board, which isn't necessarily true, it wouldn't necessarily have happened that way, but let's just say for the sake of argument, that is a full round and a half of players who in middle of January are signed professionals. Because people forget that you get drafted, you don't sign a contract. That comes later. And not everybody who gets drafted signs. The idea that we have, because I bring all of this up because there's been so much consternation about how this is going to affect college players. Would they make more money? Would they be better positioned or not without the draft, et cetera, and so forth? With the guaranteed contract structure that is in place, thanks to the CBA, from my point of view, I think it's very hard to argue that this wasn't a net benefit for college players. To have 20 of them in the middle of January on guaranteed contracts. If their team wants to get rid of them now, they either need to get that player's consent to be traded to wherever, or they need to buy out their contract, which means that money is going into these players' pockets no matter what. That wasn't always the case in the past, and it wasn't always the case for players who got picked higher in the draft than you might assume, given that structure. So for me, I think this is fantastic.
I agree with you. I think the only knock you could give and frankly, I don't give this knock a lot of like credence, is that for competitive balance, it's just like there has not been an equal distribution of these players signed to teams. Like, and there have been some teams that just kind of haven't done anything, Louisville or Houston.
Right. But yeah, no, I mean, you're right. Like Kansas City signed 4 players, Gotham signed 4, San Diego and Seattle and Washington each signed 2, as well as Bay FC. And yes, you're right. Louisville hasn't signed anyone.
Yeah, there is an inequality to the locations of where these players have ended up going, generally speaking. You know, like of the teams that we know that have analytics-based front offices, we have 13, and depending on what you want to think about what's happening with the GM situation in Portland, 14 of the 20 players going to teams that have like full staffs doing analytics. So this does feel to me a little bit the rich get richer. And frankly, like the 2 players that San Diego signed, we know they don't have an analytics front office, were like clear top 5 picks. So gone and poached. So for the Chicago hasn't signed anyone.
Houston has not signed anybody.
Louisville. These are teams that desperately need improvement.
And improvement for cheap, because I mean, signing college players, especially at this point, is going to be more affordable than going and getting somebody in the open market.
Hold up. Brooklyn Courtnall signed with North Carolina, not Kansas City, so they've only signed 3.
Right. Okay. So it's 12 players who have gone with the 5 analytics staffed teams. Still more than half.
And those teams were all very good last year. Good to very good. So I think this is better for players, almost certainly. You're ending up in situations where like teams actually need you. But like for the NWSL parity league, these college signings have not come with some sort of equal distribution of talent.
Yeah, but like, I mean, are Mary Long and Katie Scott really going to make an impact at Kansas City? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. And it's the same thing with like Kaya Harper and Zara Chavoshi and Pietra Torden. Like, these are not necessarily home run signings, so it might not be upsetting competitive balance. And indeed, like the players that Kansas City signed, like 2 one and done freshmen on 1-year deals, no way that those were expensive.
No, for sure.
So it's low risk, potentially high reward, and anybody could do that. Anybody could sign players to the contracts that Mary Long and Katie Scott are probably carrying.
Yeah, considering who Mary Long's parents are, I think the team probably got a semi-favorable deal here.
You think so?
Yeah, just a thought.
She's the child of the owners, in case people don't know.
Look, she might turn out to be great, but I would describe that as a club-friendly signing.
Yeah. But this is all to say that like that was those options were available to Chicago, Houston, Louisville easily. Maybe not Mary Long specifically, but those kinds of structured deals you could go get. And certain teams are trying to take advantage of a potential market inefficiency right now. So I don't really give a shit if it upsets competitive balance. A, because it's not guaranteed to upset competitive balance, but like this is a choice that Louisville and Chicago and Houston are making. This isn't being foisted upon them that they can't go out and get these players.
And also to the point of parity last year, and it's worth mentioning here that Washington won the draft.
Yeah.
Like they just won the draft last year. They got Croy Bethune, Hal Hirschfeld, McKenna Morris.
Yeah.
They all in the first round.
Yeah.
This is no different than what happened, but also, and they got Courtney Brown.
Yeah.
in the 4th.
Nice work. Like, you can get it.
They won the draft. So winning this offseason, there's on some level not been parity with the draft anyway. Some teams just do a lot better.
It's all wait and see, but I think the thing that we can be conclusive about is that 20 people who were only a couple of months ago college amateurs are now going to be walking away with multiple 5-figure amounts of money in their pockets, no matter what. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
all right. Anything else you want to cover?
No, we went very, very long. Happy New Year to everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Happy to be back every Tuesday in your main feed. If you are new to the show, hope you give us a review and rate us 5 stars on whatever podcatcher app you use. You can follow us as well. Tell all your friends about us. Follow us on social media at XOwnGoals. That's the letter X Own Goals. And if you believe we've made an own goal, please email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com. If you are joining the show and you have not subscribed to our Patreon tier, $6 a month or $60 a year gets you 4 bonus episodes every single month, as well as access to our Discord server and our semi-regular YouTube in-game live streams. So I think it's a steal at twice the price. So hope to see you over on Patreon and the Discord as well. Bye, everybody. Talk to you on Patreon on Thursday and talk to you on main feed next week.
Bye.